Hello there, exhausted listener. Today we are taking a sharp detour back to the Middle Ages, but not to talk about knights, castles, or lavish banquets, none of that. Today's journey is much drowsier, quite literally. You are about to discover what it was really like to try and get some shut-eye back then. And spoiler alert, it was not relaxing. Sleeping, which should be the easy part of life, was practically a medieval extreme sport. There were no orthopedic mattresses, no fluffy duvets, and certainly no snooze button on the alarm clock. There was itchy straw, icy wind cutting through poorly fitted wooden windows, collective snoring, and of course a few house pets, like pigs and chickens, sharing your bed space. And as if all that wasn't enough, there was the cherry on top. Sleeping was basically a lottery. You never knew if the night's prize would be hypothermia, a coordinated flea attack, or a rooster singing way before its cue. Congratulations, you won. A terrible night's sleep with no refund policy. Oh, and since you haven't passed out completely yet, mark your attendance. Leave that savvy like, subscribe, and comment where you are listening from. You can even write, "I'm sleepy." It counts as a historical contribution to the registry of your nocturnal suffering. And of course, click on the bell. It helps this video reach more people who also enjoy a boring story to fall asleep to. Now fix that pillow of yours, the one that doesn't hiss or release fleas, hopefully. And let's begin. You lie down. At least, you try to call it lying down because there are no spring mattresses, no NASA memory foam, no orthopedic technology approved by specialists. What you have is a sack of coarse cloth stuffed with poorly threshed straw. They call it a pallet. You call it rural torture. The straw crunches with every movement as if it were complaining right along with your spine. It hasn't been changed in weeks, maybe months, and you know this because every time you shift position, a cloud of dust rises, irritating your nose and making you cough. The sensation is clear. You're sleeping on top of a dry field. The wood that supports this sack of straw doesn't help either. It's crooked, rough, and full of splinters. Forget about a firm bed. The structure sags on one side, and you spend the night rolling inevitably into the same corner, crushed against the cold wall. And don't even think for a second that the nobility had it better. Yes, the feudal lord had a bigger bed, with a canopy, heavy curtains, and even embroidered quilts. But if you think that means comfort, spoiler, it doesn't. Because beneath the layers of expensive fabric, the same problem awaits you. Fleas, bedbugs, and infested mattresses. Deep down, it was just the same bad mattress dressed in gala attire. You shift around, trying to find a position that doesn't bruise so much, but there is no good position. If you stretch out, you feel the wood against your back. If you curl up, the straw pokes your arm. If you lie on your side, the smell of the blanket reminds you that it was used by the entire family last winter, and perhaps the one before that too. In the dead of night, you discover another delightful detail: the noise. Every time you move, the straw crackles loudly, announcing your movement. If someone is sleeping next to you, and there is always someone sleeping next to you, you wake the person up, and then comes the itching. First discreet, then insistent. It's the invisible swarm of fleas and bedbugs living inside the mattress. They bite you, multiply, and go about their lives, indifferent to the fact that you just wanted to sleep. In the dark, you scratch yourself until you give up, because you know you will never win this war. The contrast is cruel. Today, you complain if your pillow is a little lower than you'd like. Back then, you'd be thankful if a pillow existed at all, because most of the time it didn't. It was a folded cloth, hard, smelling of someone else's sweat. Resting your head on it is the medieval equivalent of resting your face on a hot brick. You catch yourself thinking, perhaps life was sweeter for the rich, but no. Go to the castle bedroom. The air is stifled by the thick fabric curtains. The mattress stuffed with goose feathers seems like paradise, until you realize it is also a condominium for mites and insects. The smell is a mixture of mold, sweat, candle smoke, and cheap perfume made from stale herbs. The difference is that in the castle, you scratch your skin with jewels on your arm, but you keep scratching. Sleep comes not because the bed helps, but because the body surrenders. You're so exhausted that even in this uncomfortable arrangement, fatigue wins. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the straw pricking your skin, the sound of creaking wood, the breathing of others right next to you, and the cruel doubt. Is the thing walking on your leg right now just a flea, or is it a small rat testing out territory? This is the medieval bed, a place that does not rest, a place that only reminds you with every movement that sleeping was never easy. And the problem didn't stop there. Besides the hard bed, there was the lack of space. You can barely move because the pillow slipped. That's right. In the Middle Ages, space was a luxury. A bed wasn't a place of rest. It was a place of community, almost a collective event. You lie down. To your left, your brother. To your right, your cousin. At the foot of the bed, a pig. Yes, a real pig. And somewhere in the middle of the confusion, a chicken that decided your leg is the official perch of the dawn. The concept of a double bed didn't exist. It was a clan bed, zero privacy. You don't choose who sleeps next to you. It could be a relative, it could be a neighbor who came to spend the night, or even an unknown traveler, because space was rare. And inn was just a fancy word for a dormitory shared with suspicious strangers. You lie there and think, well, at least I'm not alone, and you really aren't. The problem is that your cousin's snoring competes with the pig's grunting, and when you finally think silence has won, the chicken decides to cluck out of nowhere. All of this under a blanket that smells of mold and ancestral sweat. You try to turn over to find a position. Mistake! The bed is shared, so every time you move, you disrupt the entire ecosystem. The cousin grumbles, the brother kicks, the pig lets out an indignant sigh, and the chicken pecks. And this wasn't the exception. It was the standard. Families slept all together, not for a lack of imagination, but for survival. Gathering everyone in the same space meant sharing heat, sharing fear, and sharing even the fleas, which in practice didn't need an invitation. Sleeping alone in those times was strange, suspicious, sometimes even seen as a punishment. If they put you to sleep separately, it meant you messed up or that they were punishing you. And of course, the human body doesn't collaborate. You snore, your cousin snores, the pig snores. In the middle of this, the chicken decides to scratch on top of the blanket. No one sleeps well, but everyone pretends to, because they need to get up early for another day of work and hunger. And guess what? More snoring in the night. The feeling is that sleeping together isn't a choice, it's a sentence. You close your eyes and instead of silence, you find an orchestra of medieval noises. Breathing deeply doesn't help. The air is dense, heavy, full of the smell of human and animal sweat. And when sleep finally wins, it isn't rest, it's giving up. Deep down, sleeping like this is the best proof that human beings can survive anything. You endure the noise, you endure the lack of space, you endure the chicken on your knee, you even endure the flatulence of the cousin next to you, which arrives without asking for permission because there is no option. And the next morning, when the sun enters through the poorly fitted window and the rooster decides to announce the day, you wake up sore, scratching, with the smell of pig impregnated in your skin, but alive. And in the Middle Ages, that was almost a luxury. As if sharing a bed with family, a pig and a chicken wasn't enough, there was still the belief that sleeping alone was almost a sin. The answer was simple. Sleeping isolated sounded strange, suspicious, something for punished people. The normal thing was to squeeze together, sharing heat and discomfort as a group. In the Middle Ages, sharing sleeping space wasn't just due to a lack of beds or to save heat. It was also a cultural matter. Custom said that sleeping in a group brought protection, physical protection, because if someone tried to invade the house, At least they wouldn't catch everyone by surprise. And spiritual protection, because it was believed that sleep was a dangerous moment. The soul remained vulnerable, open to attacks from demons, spirits, or the simple bad luck of sudden death. And let's agree, nothing is more comforting than having a cousin snoring next to you while you try not to be possessed by evil. You lie down and stare into the dark. Outside, any noise could be a threat, a suspicious traveler, a thief, even a wild animal. If you slept alone, it would be easy to become a target. But lying among relatives, pigs and chickens, at least the enemy would have to get through this improvised army first. In theory, of course. In practice, you would probably all die together, but it's always good to have hope. And don't think the protection was only against flesh and blood invaders. There was a real fear that sleeping isolated would open space for bad influences. Sermons of the time, chronicles, and even popular customs reinforced the idea that sleep was a liminal state between life and death, between the body and the soul. That is why sleeping together with others was almost like collective armor. If something came from the beyond, let it take the whole group. Much more practical. This is why sleeping alone could even be used as a punishment. You acted out. Sleep alone in the barn. This was the medieval version of go to your room, only much more terrifying, because it meant facing the night with no one by your side, without human warmth and without the symbolic safety net. You alone in the dark was practically an invitation for death, or at least for a night of endless panic. Now think with me. Today you value privacy. You want your room, your space, your pillow, just yours. You even complain if someone breathes too loudly near you. In the medieval world, privacy was almost synonymous with disgrace. If no one wanted to share the bed with you, something was wrong. Maybe you were dangerous. Maybe you were cursed. Maybe no one trusted you. Anyway, sleeping alone wasn't a sign of peace, but of social isolation. And yes, this has a real basis. There are records in legal documents and travelers' tales describing the collective practice of sleep as common in peasant homes and even in monasteries. The habit of sharing a bed wasn't shameful, it was routine. The strange thing was the opposite. If someone slept apart, suspicions immediately arose. The fear wasn't just of the cold, it was of the invisible. While you try to drift off, squeezed into your shared bed, you realize that even religion reinforced this custom. The night was considered the most propitious moment for temptations and spiritual attacks. So, being surrounded by other bodies was like a silent network of prayer. Someone prayed softly, another murmured a litany, and presto, everyone was protected, or at least under the illusion that they were. Deep down, that was it. 5 people and a pig turned into an army against the devil. Spiritual security, medieval version. In the end, you realize that this medieval custom of sleeping together wasn't just about heat or convenience. It was about community, about the idea that even in sleep, no one was an island. The group was protection, spirituality, and principally noise. Because if the cold didn't knock you out, the collective snoring took care of that. So when you close your bedroom door today and give thanks for the silence, remember, in the past, that silence would be seen as a risk. You would be alone with your thoughts, with your dreams, with your fears, and according to the medieval mentality, with all the invisible forces that loved to attack those who had no company. The bed full of relatives, animals and discomfort was, paradoxically, the medieval version of maximum security. There was no password, no alarm, no camera. There was just a bunch of people sleeping squeezed together, believing that human warmth could scare away both the cold and evil. And you, squeezed there in the middle, realized the cruel truth. Sleeping was not rest. Sleeping was surviving in a group, because alone, no one guaranteed you would wake up. If that already sounded uncomfortable, wait for the routine of the dawn, the so-called first sleep. The body yielded quickly, heavy, almost like fainting from exhaustion. You didn't dream of anything beautiful. At most, you dreamed you were carrying firewood, because that was exactly what you spent the entire day doing. A few hours later, your eyes open. It's not insomnia, it's not a nightmare. It's not because the neighbor turned on loud music at 3 a.m., mainly because medieval neighbors didn't have speakers, just coughs. It is simply normal. Everyone wakes up in the middle of the night. To this they gave a pompous name, vigil or the watch. You look into the dark and realize there isn't much to do. The fireplace has already turned to ash, the cold pokes at your skin, and the silence is broken only by the collective snoring of the group. The cousin keeps spitting mysterious noises in his sleep. The pig grunts and the chicken, well, the chicken also decides to participate with a random cluck. Good morning. And in this vigil, what does one do? There is no cell phone to scroll through a feed, no TV series, no snooze button to trick the clock. There is just you in the pitch black, waiting for the next batch of sleep. Some pray softly, others take the opportunity to chat with those who woke up too. Yes, the middle of the night was the official time for medieval chat. You look to the side and discover that your cousin wants to discuss if the harvest will yield. 2 in the morning and you just wanted to sleep. And it wasn't just talk. Many use this interval to get up and do chores, tend to the fire, check the animals, even take a peek at the yard. Because after all, since you woke up, why not turn the middle of the night into overtime? Some even considered this moment perfect for intimacy. Exactly. The vigil was also seen as a good time to expand the family, you trying not to freeze, and someone thinking it's a romantic moment. Congratulations. After an hour or two of this limbo, the body begins to yield again. It is the time of the second sleep, lighter, shorter, but still necessary. You pull the moldy blanket, settle between the cousin and the pig, and let your body fall again until the rooster decides it is morning, even if the sun hasn't appeared yet. The most curious thing is that this bipartition sleep wasn't seen as a problem. No one called it a sleep disorder. On the contrary, it was the norm. Texts of the time, chronicles, even medical records mention the first sleep and the second sleep as a natural part of life. The body simply regulated itself to the rhythm of darkness and the lack of artificial light. You there, who wakes up in the middle of the night today and thinks it's insomnia, would just be another normal medieval person. The difference is that instead of worrying about tomorrow's meeting, you would be worried if the plague would reach the village before winter. The anxiety level is slightly different. And of course, there was no modern comfort of a snooze button. There was no way to delay the rooster, no way to pause the sun, no way to turn off the pig. When dawn passed and the second sleep ended, the day began instantly. You got up tired, sore, and covered in flea bites, and no one thought it strange. Now compare it with your current life. You despair because you woke up at 4 a.m. and spent an hour rolling in bed. In the Middle Ages, that would just be the standard vigil. Little normal routine, a natural resource of the body, transformed into a social habit. The difference is that instead of rolling in bed thinking about life, you would spend the dawn listening to your cousin's philosophy of life while the chicken pecks next to you. Deep down, segmented sleep was just another way of remembering that nothing in the Middle Ages came easy, not even sleeping. Everything was divided, broken, uncomfortable. Even rest came in 2 installments, and neither of them was of quality. The rough straw scratches, the eyes are heavy, and the body gives in for moments. It isn't rest. It is an irregular pause, full of cuts and jolts. Resisting the night was the rule. And if the first part already seemed bad, wait until you feel the cold, because if there was something those houses were specialists in, it was freezing you inside your own bedroom. The walls of stone or poorly fitted wood made thermal insulation a distant dream. With every gust of wind, a thread of sharp air enters through the cracks. It's like sleeping out in the open, only with a roof to fool your hope. You cover yourself with a thick, heavy blanket, and yet you feel the ice clinging to your feet. The pig next to you actually helps. Not because it's cute, but because it functions as a walking heater. The problem is that the pig warms you up, but along with it comes an exclusive perfume, pigsty. So yes, you get warm, but you also wake up with the aroma of a barnyard impregnated in you. And this is where the nightcaps come in. Forget the romantic movie scenes with nobles lying under silk sheets, hair loose in the wind. The reality is that practically everyone slept in a cap, a kind of beanie made of wool or tight linen on the head. It wasn't style, it was survival. Without it, you would wake up with an earache or, in the best case scenario, a nose so cold it felt like it had spent the night in the fridge. You put on the cap, it itches, it squeezes, it slips off in the middle of the night, but it is necessary because no one wanted to wake up with the flu. And remember, medieval flu wasn't 2 days of rest and acetaminophen. It was fever, superstition, and perhaps even a priest coming to pray by your bedside. Better the tight cap than an early visit for the last rites. And it wasn't just the cap. Sleeping in clothes was standard, no fluffy Egyptian cotton pajamas. You wore the same worn tunic from the day or a long linen shirt that looked more like a sack with a hole for the neck. If it was winter, then you wore layers, several, shirt, wool trousers, cloak, all at the same time. Sleeping naked, which today sounds liberating, in the Middle Ages was practically an invitation to turn into a human popsicle. Now imagine the weight of that. Literally, you lie down with 3 layers of clothes wrapped in rough wool blankets with a cap on your head. You try to move and feel your body locked. It's as if you were sleeping inside soft armor. The result? You don't rest. You survive. And even the nobles with their larger beds and more sophisticated covers didn't escape. Yes, they had tapestries on the walls and curtains around the bed, but that wasn't decorative luxury. It was a desperate attempt to retain heat. And guess what? It was still cold, because when the European winter tightened, even castles turned into stone refrigerators. You take a deep breath and feel the icy air entering your lungs. Every inspiration is a stab of winter. Every expiration forms a white cloud, visible even in the dark. It is in this moment that you understand why sharing a bed made sense. Human heat was the only available central heating, and there was still the detail of the feet. Believe me, frozen feet were a classic medieval complaint, so much so that sleeping shoes existed in some wealthier houses, a kind of thick wool sock tied at the ankle. Comfortable? No, but useful. You, a common peasant, wouldn't have that. Only a piece of cloth wrapped around, and the hope that the straw underneath helped to insulate. And of course, sleeping with a cap wasn't the least bit glamorous. You woke up with the seam mark on your forehead, matted hair, and sweat accumulated on your scalp. But still, the cap was sleep's best friend. Without it, the night wind entered through the window, and you woke up with a headache that could last for days. The irony is that today, when someone says put on a cap to sleep, it sounds like a grandma joke, but in the medieval world, it was the law of survival. Those who didn't wear one got sick. Those who got sick didn't last long. Simple as that. And try as you might, there is no way to romanticize this cold. Houses were designed to exist, not to warm. The fireplace fire died in the middle of the night, and no one wanted to waste wood for nothing. So every dawn you faced the same battle, wrapped in cloth, cap on head, body rigid with cold, hoping that sleep would be stronger than winter. Deep down, medieval sleeping was always a choice between discomforts. Either you suffered heat, squeezed between relatives and animals, or you froze alone, without a cap and without a blanket. Between itching and pneumonia, people chose itching. At the end of the dawn, you give in, huddled, wearing more clothes than you would use today to go out on the street. And even so, you dream of cold, because in the Middle Ages even dreams came frozen. You are there, huddled, with a cap on your head, too many clothes on your body, trying to ignore the cold that insists on passing through the walls. It's not enough to share a bed with family pig and chicken. It's not enough to wake up in the middle of the night without a snooze button. There is still another detail that won't let you relax. The real fear of dying while sleeping. Yes, sleeping was risky. Today you lie down thinking about turning off the alarm clock the next day. In the Middle Ages you lay down thinking, will I wake up? And it wasn't paranoia, it was reality. Flu could take you, infections too, sudden fevers, apnea, accidents with the fireplace, or smoke in a poorly ventilated room. Everything was a threat. A quiet night could turn into the last one. And it was from this fear that night prayers emerged. Before sleeping, almost everyone performed the same ritual. They prayed. Praying wasn't an option. It was a medieval antivirus. The most well-known prayer was a variation of, "If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Poetic? No. You are trying to rest. And the last thing you say is basically a preventive farewell letter. You close your eyes, murmur the words, and hope. You pray not only for yourself, but for the whole family. You ask for protection against diseases, against thieves, against demons. Because yes, it was believed that the night was the devil's preferred time to prowl. Sleep was seen as a dangerous state, a middle ground near death, where the soul could wander, get lost, or be attacked. Hence the need for prayer, a spiritual antivirus to try and keep the session safe. And don't think this was silly superstition, it was routine. Sermons, religious manuals, and even prayer books brought specific instructions for the moment of lying down. A formal request to God, almost like filling out an insurance form before passing out. Now imagine modern you lying down and having to recite every night a phrase that acknowledges the real chance of not opening your eyes the next day. And there was more. Many families had collective prayers. Before lying down, everyone prayed together. The father led, the children repeated, and only then did everyone settle into the shared bed. It was a kind of community firewall against the dangers of the night. If it went wrong, at least everyone had prayed together. But it wasn't just religion. The fear was practical. Fires could go out and release toxic smoke. Wool blankets could catch fire. Animals inside the house could suffocate or crush small children. Night death had various paths, and all were too banal to be ignored. That is why prayer wasn't a detail, it was an emotional necessity. You see yourself lying there, murmuring your words, trying to ignore the cousin kicking your leg, the pig snoring at the foot of the bed, and the chicken adjusting its wings. And deep down you understand why this practice made sense. It was the only way to try and tame the chaos. And the most ironic part, today some of these prayers still exist, repeated in children's versions as if they were lullabies. You may have heard it. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep, if I should die before I wake. It seems cute when said to a child, but in its origin, it was serious. It was raw fear, transformed into routine. You take a deep breath, feel the cold, tighten your cap, and think, sleeping was not rest. Sleeping was a test of faith. If you woke up, victory. If you didn't wake up, well, at least you had done your part, recited the correct password before lying down. And of course, there was no guarantee of anything. Not even the best prayer protected you from a rat biting your finger, from a fever, or from a pile of straw catching fire. But without it, the sensation was one of total vulnerability. How to sleep without first notifying God that you would like, preferably, to open your eyes again. So you settle into the hard straw, the cold biting your hands, the weight of the blanket smelling of mold on your body, and repeat, "If I die before I wake." The body eventually gives in, not for peace, but out of pure exhaustion. The fear is still there, silent, but buried under the weight of fatigue. Squeezed in the bed, cap tight on your head, the recently murmured prayer still echoes in your mind. If I die before I wake, repose arrives, but never alone, because sleep in this time came with a mandatory bonus: dreams. Today you dream that you missed the bus, that you fell off a building, that you showed up naked to a work meeting, and you wake up laughing or feeling weird. In the medieval world, none of that was a joke. Dreaming was serious business. Dreaming was a message. It could be from God. It could be from the devil. You were never sure which of the two had sent the notification. Imagine dreaming of a ladder. Today, it's just your brain glitching after watching too many stories. In the Middle Ages, it was a sign. A ladder could mean spiritual ascension, but also a fall, or even something demonic trying to confuse you. In short, any dream could be read in various ways, and none of them brought peace. And it wasn't just village gossip. There were entire treatises on this, medieval books called Oneirocritica that taught how to interpret dreams. Monks, priests, and even doctors used these sleep sciences. If you dreamed of bread, it could be abundance. If you dreamed of fire, it could be divine punishment. And if you dreamed of animals, well, prepare for hours of sermons on your questionable morality. You toss on the straw and think, how tranquil, right? Sleeping was already difficult, and now every detail of the dream became a subject to be analyzed the next day. It was like waking up and discovering you became the protagonist of a spiritual reality show. And the worst part, a bad dream could mean punishment. If you dreamed of death, demons, or some macabre omen, it wasn't just a nightmare. It was a sign that something was wrong with your life, your faith, or even your family. Many believed that bad dreams were direct attacks from the devil, trying to shake the soul during sleep. Result, you woke up not only tired, but also afraid of being spiritually screwed. Now imagine, you dream you fell into a well. Instead of just laughing and thinking, wow, how bizarre, you have to run to tell a priest, ask for absolution, and maybe even do penance. Your unconscious became just another form of being billed by the community. And of course, there was also the positive side. Some people believed that dreams were divine revelations, direct messages from God or the saints. The lives of various medieval saints are filled with stories of dreams announcing miracles, missions, or even martyrdoms. In other words, if you had a beautiful dream, it wasn't just rest either. It was a sign of responsibility. Basically, you were either condemned or conscripted. Sleeping peacefully? Never. You roll your eyes in the dark and realize how heavy this must have been. The common peasant, already tired from so much work, still had to deal with the eternal doubt. Was this dream a divine message or a demonic prank? It is almost like receiving an important email at 3 a.m. and not knowing if it's from the boss or a phishing scam. And to make matters worse, dreams were used even as social arguments. If someone had a dream involving a neighbor, this could turn into serious gossip. I dreamed you were stealing wheat, and presto, that was enough to sow distrust. The dream became proof, justification, even a motive for a fight. You didn't control even your own image while you slept. And don't think this was only for simple folk. Kings, nobles, and monks also took dreams seriously. There are records of royal advisors interpreting dreams as if they were political reports. A wrong dream could change government decisions. While you dream today about a pizza, a medieval king could dream of blood and decide to start a war. Congratulations once again to the power of misunderstood sleep. You take a deep breath and think. Even nightmares were worse back then. Today you wake up sweating because you dreamed you lost your cell phone. Back then, you woke up shaking because you thought you had just received a prophecy from hell. There was no middle ground. And as if that weren't enough, there were penances linked to this. If the dream was considered suspicious, extra prayers, fasting, and public confessions were recommended. What was supposed to be just a nap turned into a spiritual marathon. Imagine, you can't rest even when your body shuts down. You look at the dark ceiling, feel the chicken moving next to you, and sigh. In the Middle Ages, nightly rest didn't end when you opened your eyes. It continued the next day in the form of interpretations, sermons, and penances. It was an uncomfortable post-credit scene. Deep down, medieval sleep was like everything else in that era, full of symbolic, spiritual, and social weight. It was never enough to just exist. Even dreams needed meaning, needed suspicion, needed vigilance. And you realize perhaps it was easier to sleep in the cold, share the bed with a pig, and endure the fleas than to have to deal with the psychological stress of transforming every dream into a possible message from God or the devil. At least on this point, modern life won. If for the common peasant even dreaming was a source of anxiety, inside the monasteries, things reached another level because there, even sleep was regulated. You are already tired of imagining the crowded bed, the biting cold and the prowling fleas. But now forget life in the fields and enter the routine of the monks, where sleeping was as controlled as praying. In the monasteries, there were no soft individual beds. The norm was collective dormitories, long stone halls where dozens of monks lay side by side. Each had their simple cot, a hard wooden structure with straw, and that's it. No curtain, no privacy, no luxury. The idea wasn't to rest well, but to tame the body. After all, the more discomfort, the more spiritual virtue. And as if it weren't hard enough sleeping in rows with other men grumbling, there were the scheduled interruptions. Monastic sleep was chopped up by prayers. Imagine you just closed your eyes, and in the middle of the night a bell echoes through the monastery. It is the call for matins, the first religious office of the day, or rather, of the dawn. Everyone gets up still dizzy with sleep, puts on their thick habits, and heads to the church to sing psalms in the cold of the night. Then they go back to the dormitory and try to sleep a little more until the next call. It's almost like living with a human alarm clock that rings several times and without the option of hitting the snooze button. And this discipline wasn't random. Writings like the Rule of St. Benedict, one of the fundamental texts of monastic life in the West, organized even rest. No excesses. Sleep was short, controlled, divided into pieces that interspersed prayer and vigil. The body never surrendered totally to repose because the soul couldn't relax too much. You look around this imaginary dormitory and notice absolute silence. Whispering, laughing, or moving too much is not allowed. If the peasant had a choir of snores, here the rule is forced silence, or at least the attempt, since no monk is free from coughs, grumbles, and a few discreet snores. And don't think monastic life was exempt from the same discomforts as the rest of the population. Fleas, bedbugs, cold. All of this was also part of the routine. What changed was the purpose. The peasant slept poorly because they had no choice. The monk slept poorly because he believed that suffering in the body purified the soul. Imagine you, accustomed to trying to optimize sleep with an app that measures your breathing, being thrown into a medieval monastery. Your deep sleep graph would basically be a non-existent line. You would barely pass out before being woken by the bell, and the worst part, with a resigned smile, because complaining about discomfort was a sign of spiritual weakness. And dreams for them also had weight, but inside the monasteries, dreams were treated with even more caution. Monks noted nocturnal visions in chronicles, and often it was interpreted that they could come from God, or of course from the devil. A monk who had suspicious dreams might even confess them to the abbot as if they were a sin. And it wasn't just about praying in the middle of the dawn. The very architecture of the monasteries reinforced this lifestyle. Collective dormitories built next to the church facilitated the trip back and forth for the night offices. There was no escape. If the bell rang, you were a few steps from the prayer bench. The result was simple. Monks lived exhausted, but for them, this was virtue. Broken sleep, a punished body, repetitive discipline, all of this molded the spirit. You, who get irritated because you lost 2 hours of sleep due to the light of your cell phone, would have collapsed in the first month of the cloister. And the most curious thing is that over time, this custom influenced society around it. The monastic model of dividing the night into cycles of prayer and sleep helped consolidate the idea that sleeping was something that could not be left to chance. Even for rest, there were rules. You take a deep breath and think, it wasn't enough to fear dying while sleeping, nor the nightmares full of dubious meanings. There was also the religious pressure that sleeping too much was a sin against discipline. The body was seen as lazy and sleep as a trap. In the end, monastic life is the extreme version of everything described so far. Sleeping poorly, but with purpose. Suffering, but in the name of faith. The peasant slept poorly because life was hard. The monk made a point of sleeping poorly because he believed hardness was a virtue. And you, lying on this imaginary wooden cot, woken by the bell at 2 a.m. to pray in the biting cold, can only think of one thing. Even tiredness was controlled. After seeing monks getting up at dawn to pray in the cold, you might imagine that the wealthier folks at least had a bit more comfort. But no. Among the nobles, the curious habit of sleeping semi-seated was common. The scene seems almost elegant, like a painting. Pillows propped up, heavy curtains around the bed, bodies slightly raised. But the charm lasted about 5 minutes. Then it turned into back pain, a stiff neck and tingling legs. This way of sleeping had medical justifications to start with. Medieval doctors still followed theories inherited from antiquity, like Galen's, who believed that lying completely flat wasn't healthy. Semi-seated, the body supposedly digested food better, avoided reflux, and even reduced the chance of choking. There were also religious reasons. Lying flat was often compared to death. The straight body resembled a corpse. So, sleeping inclined was seen as safer, as if it were a middle ground between being alive and resting without looking like a cadaver in training. It was a way to avoid dangerous symbolisms, or at least uncomfortable ones to imagine. And don't think it was just royal fussiness. This habit also appeared in hospitals and infirmaries, where the sick were left propped up to breathe better. Of course, medieval medicine didn't offer great results. The most you got was a bad night's sleep in an uncomfortable position. Now put yourself in their place. It wasn't enough to have a hard bed, fleas, cold, and a lack of silence. On top of that, you had to spend the night sitting up as if you were watching an imaginary play. The result was predictable. Light sleep, sore body, and a feeling that your neck had spent the night fighting gravity. But there was also the symbolic factor. Sleeping upright, especially among nobles, was a sign of distinction. The peasant lay down and passed out without choice. The lords did not. They propped themselves on embroidered pillows, surrounded by curtains, as if sleep were a ceremony. Of course, the body complained just the same, only the pomp changed. And as if that weren't enough, there are reports that some people slept in reclining chairs or benches, as if they were always on alert. The idea was that a semi-upright body was more prepared to wake up in the face of dangers or to pray if the night was interrupted. It seems practical until you realize you woke up with half your body numb and the other half complaining. You might even imagine this resembled the ancient paintings of Roman banquets, where everyone ate lying on their sides. Perhaps this classic image inspired the association, even if it wasn't a literal copy. But let's be honest. In practice, it was just discomfort repackaged as tradition. And here's the funny detail. This custom was so widespread that it ended up inspiring artistic and religious images. Many saints and biblical figures were represented resting in a semi-reclined position as if it were natural. It was a way of saying, look, even sleep has a hierarchy. Meanwhile, you, sitting on your modern bed with ergonomic pillows, know you wouldn't last 2 nights in that position. Imagine spending several nights like that, with your body crooked and your pride sustained by the idea that this was elegant and healthy. Spoiler, it wasn't. The curious thing is that this habit also reinforces a constant of the period. Everything about sleep was loaded with meaning. It wasn't enough to lie down. It was necessary to think about whether the position pleased God, if it helped digestion, if it avoided looking like a corpse. Every detail came with moral, spiritual, or medical justification. And the body in the middle of this just had to deal with it. In the end, what was sold as noble posture was just another way to transform rest into discipline. While the people slept squeezed on the floor, the rich slept propped up like living statues. Either way, no one woke up well. As if the cold, the desperate prayers, and the discomfort of crooked positions weren't enough, there was another inevitable nocturnal companion. Insects, fleas, bedbugs, lice. All of them had a reserved spot in your bed. It didn't matter if you were a peasant, a merchant, or even a noble. At some point, these little parasites would be part of your nightly routine. And it wasn't one or two bites. It was an infestation worthy of a colony. The fleas were the champions, small, fast, multiplying, without asking for permission. The fact that people slept with animals inside the house only made the party worse. Pigs, chickens, dogs, cats. Each one was a transfer station for new batches of fleas. You functioned as just another dish at the banquet, and as if the itching wasn't enough, many of them carried serious diseases. Rat fleas, for example, were the great transmitters of the bubonic plague. Bedbugs followed close behind. Hiding in the cracks of the wood and the fabrics of the blankets, they spent the day invisible and the night in coordinated attack. Anyone who has woken up with rows of bites knows the sensation well. And back then, there was no repellent, insecticide, or anti-mite sheet. The most one could do was burn dry herbs, believing the smoke would drive the bugs away. Did it work? Of course not. It just left everything smelling like burnt seasoning. And the lice? The lice, these were almost part of the family. They lived on the heads of children and adults, without discrimination. Bone or metal combs were used to hunt them, but the victory was always temporary. Before long, they returned to colonize the scalp. It was so common that kings and queens had servants dedicated to picking parasites from their luxurious manes. The entire court wrapped in silk and jewels, but stopping the day because the sovereign needed an intensive lice-picking session. The most curious thing is that these annoyances were not seen as a scandal, but as a natural part of life. Waking up itchy was as routine as hearing the rooster announce the day. And in periods of epidemic, fear grew. Any redness could seem like a harbinger of something worse. What started with a bite could end in collective paranoia. Attempts at control existed, of course. Besides burnt herbs and ashes sprinkled on the straw, there were strong oils rubbed into the hair to try and kill lice. The result was always the same: head-burning, unpleasant smell, and a new batch of parasites appearing a few days later. And don't think high society was free from this. Embroidered clothes and beds with silk curtains did not prevent the invasion. Often, the curtains served precisely as a hiding place for bedbugs. Luxury only made the insects more comfortably accommodated. Meanwhile, you, accustomed to losing sleep over a single mosquito buzzing in the room, would be incapable of dealing with this veritable convention of parasites. Imagine spending the night trying not to move so as not to irritate the chicken, while at the same time feeling dozens of bites spreading across your body. It is almost improvised torture. And the most perverse detail, there was no way out. Neither wealth, nor devotion, nor miraculous trick totally eliminated these unwanted guests. Sleep was almost always accompanied by itching, scratches, and red spots scattered on the skin. A clean bed was more fantasy than reality. Deep down, the fleas, bedbugs, and lice were the true masters of the night. They didn't need invitations, didn't respect noble curtains, didn't get intimidated by prayers. Wherever there was human warmth, there they were, reminding you that the body was never totally at peace. If fleas and bedbugs were already unbearable company, imagine adding iron and steel to the package. Soldiers and knights on campaign didn't have the luxury of throwing themselves onto straw and complaining about the smell. Their sleep happened on the cold ground, often in open fields, and always with the worry that the enemy could attack at any moment. And this changed everything, because while the peasant dealt with itching and snoring, the warrior spent the night hugging his own equipment: swords, daggers, lances. Each weapon became a kind of improvised pillow, not by choice, but by necessity. No one wanted to be caught by surprise with nothing in hand. The armor, in turn, was another torment. Sleeping with a full set was practically impossible. The weight, the rigidity, and the heat turned the body into an uncomfortable statue. Still, many knights kept at least part of the equipment on during rest. A helmet by the side, boots on, the breastplate half open, enough not to be defenseless if someone emerged from the dark. And war camps were noisy. The sound of horses, weapons being arranged, companions coughing or murmuring, not to mention the smoke from bonfires that impregnated clothes and blankets. There was no silence, there was no privacy. Rest was a tense interval, as if the body dozed but the mind remained on alert. Sources from the time describe soldiers sleeping in rows side by side, weapons within immediate reach. In many sieges, they slept practically dressed for battle, because at any moment a trumpet could sound and combat would restart. The battlefield offered no guarantees of anything, not even a few hours of repose, and there was also the detail of the filth. Camps were precarious spaces full of mud, food scraps, and animals. Imagine lying there covered by a rustic blanket, while feeling the weight of the sword on your hip and the dampness rising from the ground. If the straw bed already seemed hostile, the soldier's bed was an even crueler version. But it wasn't just physical. There was the psychological factor. Many warriors believed that sleeping deeply was dangerous because it left the soul vulnerable. Waking up startled in the middle of the night, ready to grab a weapon, was seen as a virtue, a sign of discipline and vigilance. A good combatant should be able to open his eyes at any sound and react. This made sleep even more fragmented. Small naps, often sitting up or leaning against a wall, replaced long hours of repose. Chronicles report that some knights even dozed while mounted, exhausted, still holding the lance firmly in hand. Resistance pushed to the limit, and the body just had to cope. While you complain today about waking up tired because your cell phone vibrated twice, a medieval warrior considered it a luxury to have managed 3 hours straight without being called to guard the camp. The comparison is cruel, but it shows the difference in scale well. And even far from the battlefields, the idea of sleeping ready to react wasn't exclusive to soldiers. In dangerous regions, common travelers also adopted the practice of keeping knives or clubs at hand during the night. The road was full of bandits, and an unprepared rest could cost dearly. The irony is that this attitude today would be seen as paranoia, but for them it was survival. A warrior who relaxed too much might simply not wake up. Rest was always measured, always suspicious. Visualize the scene. A camp surrounded by improvised tents, torches scattered, men spread across the ground. Some try to nap wrapped in blankets, others keep a sword across their lap. The noise of armor dragging on the soil mixes with the crackling of bonfires. It is the type of night where no one really rests. They just wait for the next order. In the end, sleeping armed wasn't a choice. It was a condition of the trade. The peasant suffered with fleas, the noble with pillows that helped nothing, the monk with rigid prayer rules. The soldier, in turn, passed the night with his mind trapped in the possibility of combat. Each had their burden. If there were a ranking of nocturnal discomfort, the soldier would certainly dispute the top spot. Not because of the cold or the fleas, but because of the constant risk of being woken by the enemy. As if the noise of the snores, the itch of the fleas, and the fear of attacks weren't enough, there was yet another type of nocturnal disturbance. People who simply got up in the middle of the dawn and started walking as if they were awake. Today, you call this sleepwalking. At the time, they called it demonic influence. After all, the word somnambulism would only appear centuries later when doctors began to study the phenomenon scientifically. Imagine the scene. Everyone squeezed into the same room, relative silence, until someone rises suddenly, eyes open but unfocused, and starts walking through the straw. For those watching, that had no natural explanation. It could only be witchcraft or the devil taking the poor guy's body for a test drive. And this isn't an invented interpretation. Demonology treatises and chronicles of the time record cases of people taken during sleep. Sleepwalking behavior, which today is explained as a sleep disorder, was seen as clear evidence that something from the beyond was in action. If the person talked to themselves, then even worse, it was a sign of direct dialogue with evil forces. Families, not knowing what to do, applied solutions as creative as they were useless. Tying up the sleepwalker was common practice. The logic was simple. If the body is tied, the devil can't take it for a walk. Another solution was to scatter amulets around the room. Crucifixes, pieces of relics, even herbs considered protective. If it didn't work, at least it left the house smelling like seasoning. And there was also the belief that the soul could get lost during these episodes. Some believed that the sleepwalker was someone whose soul was wandering, leaving the body as an empty shell. Seeing a person walking in the middle of the night, pale with a strange look, was like witnessing an improvised zombie. The fear wasn't just of what could happen to them, but of what that meant for everyone around. The irony is that in small communities, these episodes gained fame rapidly. It was enough for someone to be seen wandering during the dawn to become a target of comments the next day. So-and-so got up at night without realizing it. Certainty that he's being touched by evil. Ordeal, the sleepwalker, became a character of gossip, suspected of witchcraft or victim of a curse. In some cases, this had serious consequences. People considered repeatedly possessed during sleep could end up isolated, watched, or even taken to the clergy for an attempted exorcism. What today would be resolved with a medical consultation could turn into a ritual with holy water and endless prayers. And it wasn't just sleepwalking. Other disorders like talking in sleep, moaning, or having spasms were also interpreted as suspicious signs. The body, not obeying the rules of repose, was always a reason for distrust. After all, the night was territory where the invisible had space to act, and any behavior outside the standard confirmed this idea. The curious thing is that, despite the fear, there was a certain pragmatism. Some manuals of conduct suggested simple care. Do not wake the sleepwalker abruptly. Do not let him leave the house. Keep him under observation. A mixture of superstition and practical observation. It was like saying, the devil may be using him, but let's prevent him from falling into the well. Can you imagine the tension of this? Sleeping was already an experience surrounded by discomforts, and suddenly, in the middle of the dawn, someone gets up and starts walking. The others wake up, murmur prayers, light a candle, and watch the scene without knowing if they need to tie the person up or call a priest. And of course, there were always those who tried to rationalize. Some doctors of the time, still stuck on the theories of humors, believed that these episodes were caused by excess vapors in the brain. No possession, just bodily imbalance, but the explanation rarely convinced an entire community. For the majority, it was easier to believe that sleep was the gateway to the supernatural. In the end, sleepwalking and other nocturnal behaviors reinforced a collective sensation. At night, the human being had no control over himself. And if there was already fear of sudden death during sleep, seeing someone wandering without consciousness only increased the conviction that repose was dangerous terrain. Today, you laugh at a video of a sleepwalker opening the fridge. In the Middle Ages, the reaction was different. Pray a rosary and call the priest running. Thus, one more layer of tension was added to already difficult nights. It wasn't enough to deal with cold, hunger, insects and noise. There was still the possibility that your bedmate would rise suddenly, eyes glazed, and start walking as if guided by another force. And everyone believed it really could be. After insects, superstitions, and people walking while sleeping as if possessed, there was still another enemy of the night, the noise. There was nothing resembling the modern concept of nocturnal silence. The medieval night, without repeating the worn-out term, let's treat as those nights of old, was an involuntary acoustic festival. First, the animals. Roosters that didn't know how to wait for sunrise and crowed at random times, dogs barking at the slightest movement, cows mooing in the stable stuck to the house. The famous tranquil countryside was in practice a sonic zoo, open 24 hours a day. Inside the house, it was no better. The collective bed meant snoring in stereo, persistent coughs, groans of pain, conversations murmured during the vigils. The human body, when piled onto hard straw, made more noise than any market fair. Imagine an out-of-tune orchestra, an uncle clearing his throat, a cousin resonating deeply, a child crying, the pig grumbling on the side. Each sound overlapped the other without any conductor to organize it. And outside, the sound of the cities brought its own soundtrack. Church bells marked the hours, including at dawn, reminding everyone that not even sleep was totally disconnected from religion. Night watchmen banged spears on the ground or shouted alerts through the streets. Carts passed until late. Animals crossed alleys. Rest was never really silent. Some accounts describe the custom of bells ringing at dawn to remind people of night prayers. Imagine waking up not because the neighbor has the TV loud, but because an entire church decided that 3 a.m. was an excellent time to make noise and without the option to complain. Even in the monasteries, where silence was the rule, there was no complete peace. Coughs echoed in the collective dormitories, candles crackled, rats ran across the stone floor. Silence only existed in theory. In practice, it was always interrupted by noises that reminded everyone that the night was never truly tranquil. And yet, despite the sonic chaos, people slept. Not because it was comfortable, but because exhaustion crushed any resistance. After working all day, carrying wood, ploughing the field, cooking, sowing, praying, and dealing with diseases, the body simply blacked out. Sleep arrived as an inevitable collapse, independent of the environment. It is curious to think that while today you come here to listen to this boring story to try and relax, back then what cradled sleep was a chaotic soundtrack. Snores, moos, coughs, clucks, and bells mixed together. And somehow it worked, not because it was pleasant, but because there was no alternative. Descriptions of the time reinforce that the fatigue was so great that even the most irritating noise ended up swallowed by the surrendered body. Fatigue was the best anesthetic. One slept amidst sounds that today would make anyone lose patience in minutes. Of course, there were consequences. Interrupted rest left everyone more vulnerable to disease, more irritable, and less productive. But life offered no second option. You slept because you needed to, even if in the background there was always an off-key rooster, a snoring uncle, and the church bell reminding you that even time was collective. And here lies the irony. The noise that seemed the enemy of sleep ended up becoming part of it. Those born in this environment simply got used to it. Complaining was useless, so the body learned to shut down in the middle of the confusion. The difference for today is clear. You get nervous because the neighbor dragged a chair at 11 p.m. In the past, the neighbor not only dragged the chair, he lived inside the same room with his animals, and the church bell took charge of ringing right in the middle of the dawn to complete the experience. It was a constant show, without a ticket and without a pause. And yet, at every dawn, everyone got up to repeat the routine. There was no morning nap, no day off to recover sleep. There was only the certainty that the following night would bring the same sounds, the same interruptions, and the same fight against fatigue. In the end, noise wasn't the exception. It was the fixed backdrop. The true challenge was not to go crazy with it, and the only remedy was the exhaustion of the body that erased any critical consciousness. If there was snoring, coughing, or bells, patience. The weight of daily life always spoke louder than any soundtrack. After getting through a night like that, you can't call sleep repose. It was a veritable obstacle course. First the straw pricking your back, then the relatives piled next to you, the pig disputing space at your feet, the chicken using your leg as a perch, and the insects taking advantage of every piece of exposed skin. When it wasn't that, it was the constant noise. Snores, coughs, moos, clucks, the church bell reminding you that even at dawn you had a schedule to keep. And as if it weren't enough, there was still the weight of beliefs. Prayers to ward off death, interpretations of dreams as messages from the beyond, the fear that someone sleepwalking would get up suddenly, giving the impression of being possessed. Every layer of the night carried a reminder that sleep was never simple, but surrounded by symbols, fears, and discomforts. Put all this in sequence, and the comparison with current life becomes almost cruel. Today, you get irritated because your cell phone vibrated at 3 a.m. with a useless notification. Back then, the vibration was a flea biting your ankle, and there was no mute button. You complained because the neighbor dragged a chair upstairs. There, the neighbor snored on the same straw mattress a few inches from your ear and probably coughed tubercular blood as a bonus. Your dissatisfaction with the mattress, which isn't as soft as promised, would sound like a joke to someone who spent a life lying on crooked wood, covered by blankets inherited from previous generations. And if you've ever huffed because someone took your favorite pillow, imagine having no pillow at all and needing to improvise with your own arm, praying that the chicken wouldn't resolve to balance there. The irony is that in the end, everyone survived, mistreated, full of aches, exhausted but alive. And that was the victory. Sleeping wasn't pleasure. It was just the minimum pause to guarantee that the body functioned the next day. If today you seek sleep quality with apps, smart bracelets and relaxing teas, back then technology was scattering herbs on the bed in the hope of warding off bed bugs. It's also worth remembering that sleep was collective, not just for lack of space, but for necessity. Sharing human heat in winter could mean the difference between waking up the next day or never waking up again. The same goes for sleeping in a group for protection against invaders, wild animals, or even against the invisible fear of the supernatural. Discomfort came hand in hand with survival instinct, and this explains why sleeping alone was seen with strangeness. Today you think it normal to have your private room with a closed door, blackout curtain, and orthopedic pillow. For them, this would be suspicious. Isolation was a sign of punishment, sin, or something wrong. The normal thing was to be together, even if together meant sharing the blanket with a sweaty cousin and 3 not very discreet lice. After this long night when the sun finally emerged and the rooster, the same one that hadn't stopped crowing, announced the dawn, the body got up even heavier, but there was no time to recover. Life called. The field, the trade, the mass, the chores. Complaining was impossible. It was the routine. Bad sleep was just another piece of the survival puzzle. Now look at yourself. You who wake up angry because your cell phone battery didn't last until morning, who complain about the mattress because it has a spring out of place, who lose patience because the neighbor forgot the TV on. Your list of nocturnal problems is worthy of a 5-star hotel compared to what a common night was centuries ago. So the next time you think about uttering "I can't sleep properly," remember that you could be dividing the space with a pig, getting pecked by a chicken, scratching bug bites, hearing bells at 3 a.m. and praying not to die before waking up. Complaining about the soft mattress, the ergonomic pillow, or the cell phone notification is, in the end, a privilege. A privilege that no peasant, noble, or medieval monk would even dare to dream of. And it is with this far from relaxing reminder that we end the nocturnal journey. Good night, weary listener, and until next time, sleep with a tired story.